She waited by the door with trembling hands, her old suitcase cradled close. He didn't know it held the fortune of a lifetime. But all he saw was a burden he was done carrying. The coffee had gone cold again. Margaret didn't mind. She wasn't really drinking it. She sat in the same faded recliner she'd bought when Jeremy was 8, back when money was tight and love had to stretch further than her paycheck ever could. She traced her finger along the mug's chipped rim and looked across the quiet living room. Her eyes landed on the dusty piano. No one had touched it in years. Her apartment was small but filled with memories, hand-painted cards from kindergarten, crayon stick drawings that once earned a proud spot on the fridge, a framed photo of the two of them at his college graduation. Margaret smiled faintly, though the pain behind her eyes suggested it had been a while since that smile had reached her heart. Jeremy didn't call much these days. Not unless something was wrong. And that morning, something was. A loud knock rattled the door. Margaret startled, her old heart jumping. She stood up slowly, joints stiff, knees groaning under her weight. She opened the door. Jeremy stood there, tall and sharp in a navy suit, lips pressed into a tight line. No hug. No smile. "Mom," he said coldly. "We need to talk." Jeremy hadn't slept well in weeks. The company was hemorrhaging cash, investors were backing out, and he was burning through options faster than his legal team could clean up. Everything was falling apart. And then there was his mother, sweet, well-meaning, but always there. Always fussing. Always reminding him to eat, to rest, to just be careful, Jeremy. He didn't need reminders. He needed space. He needed oxygen. And her presence felt like a weight dragging him under. He remembered the conversation with Nicole, his fiancée, the night before. "She's always around, Jeremy. You're a grown man with a life now, she needs to let go." He'd nodded, half-drunk and angry. So now, standing in her doorway, watching her blink up at him with confusion, Jeremy felt none of the guilt he would later drown in. "I think it's time you moved out," he said, voice flat. "It's just not working anymore." She stared at him. "What?" "I've already arranged a moving company. They'll come at 3. I'll pay for a motel. You can figure things out from there." Jeremy was halfway down the hallway before she could ask why. 3 hours later, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed in the cheapest motel Jeremy's assistant could find. The room smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes. The curtains didn't close all the way. Next to her, a battered brown suitcase. It had been in the back of her closet for 20 years. Inside, beneath old scarves and birthday cards, wrapped tightly in 4 layers of plastic and linen, was $19.5 million. She'd never told him. Not about the inheritance. Not about the investment firm she quietly built in her late 50s. Not about the cancer scare that changed everything and made her start hiding money, just in case. And now backslash. She'd been thrown out like clutter. Like nothing. She gripped the suitcase a little tighter, her knuckles white. Have you ever been dismissed by someone you loved, only for them to have no idea how much you were carrying for them? Let us know in the comments. Hello, my beautiful family and friends. I'm so happy to have you here. If you're ready to be part of this special story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from you. And be sure to stay tuned, because tomorrow I'll be back with another story that's just as unforgettable, and you won't want to miss it. Alright, let's begin this journey together. Sometimes it's the invisible sacrifices that hurt the most. The motel light flickered. Margaret sat still, staring at the peeling wallpaper as though it might offer answers. She hadn't cried, not yet. The shock formed a strange cocoon around her, dulling everything. Only the hum of the old air conditioning and the quiet, heavy weight of the suitcase beside her kept her grounded. $19.5 million. She had never touched a cent of it. Over 2 decades ago, when a distant cousin passed away without heirs, she inherited everything. At first, she considered giving it all away. What did a school cafeteria worker and single mother need with that kind of money? But something held her back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe survival. Maybe it was the part of her that had lived through eating stale toast and counting pennies in Jeremy's childhood. She had vowed then never to let him know. She didn't want him to grow up with money. She wanted him to grow up with values. And now, he had neither. She closed her eyes. Her chest ached, not from anger, but sorrow so deep it twisted her ribs. At that moment, the bag on the bed shifted slightly, its zipper tugged loose by accident. A corner of a bank document slipped into view, simple, harmless, but worth everything. Margaret gently tucked it back in, hands trembling. Meanwhile, Jeremy sat in his high-rise office with the city lights flaring behind him like taillights of a life leaving him behind. Nicole had left a few hours ago, cold, short, annoyed. She was your mother, Jeremy. You didn't even give her a week's notice. Jeremy ran a hand through his hair and said nothing. Nicole had rolled her eyes and left. He poured himself a drink, the glass clinking against the marble counter. For the first time since leaving his mother at that motel, something twisted inside him. Not quite guilt. Not yet. Just discomfort. He turned on the TV. A local channel flashed with breaking news. Quiet millionaire philanthropist passes away, reveals multi-million-dollar trust managed by unnamed woman. Jeremy froze. On the screen, a photo of a woman in her late 50s flashed. She looked vaguely familiar, older now, more refined, her name kept anonymous. His breath caught. The woman resembled, no. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. He clicked off the TV, muttering, coincidence. Still, he couldn't shake the chill in his spine. That night, Margaret sat cross-legged on the bed, watching old home videos on her phone. Jeremy as a toddler, tugging on her skirt, holding up drawings, saying, I made this for you, Mama. She pressed her palm to the screen, tears finally rising. She whispered, you were my whole world. Even when I had nothing. And she meant it. If you had millions to your name, but your child didn't know, would you tell them, or keep it hidden to see who they'd become without it? Share your thoughts below. This story just turned a corner. Jeremy tried to bury the flicker of doubt beneath his workload. He stayed late at the office, took double meetings, pretended his phone wasn't buzzing with calls from Nicole, and ignored the silent ache settling in his chest like rust. Still, every quiet moment screamed. At night, in the silence of his luxury apartment, he found himself walking to the closet where a few of his childhood things were stored, kept more out of obligation than sentiment. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a Mother's Day card from when he was 9. To Mom, thank you for giving me everything. Even when you had nothing. He stared at it for a long time, then crumpled it in his fist. Don't be dramatic, he muttered aloud. She's fine. She'll figure it out. She always does. But the voice in his head didn't buy it. And neither did the guilt that clung to his skin like sweat. At the motel, Margaret was finding it harder to move. Not from illness, though her joints ached more in the cold, but from the emotional inertia of heartbreak. Days passed in silence. The front desk clerk asked if she needed anything, but she just shook her head politely and returned to her room. She had no plan. No desire to use the money. Not for revenge. Not even for rescue. I didn't raise him to need money, she whispered one night into the darkness. I raised him to be kind. Where did I go wrong? She clutched a worn photo of them. He was 10, missing a front tooth, arms wrapped around her neck. She wondered if he remembered that day. Jeremy called his assistant. Hey, did my mother check into the motel I booked? A pause. Yes, sir. She's still there. Hasn't left the room much. You want me to? No. No, it's fine. Just checking. He hung up, jaw tight. He didn't go visit. Instead, he poured another drink. On the fourth night, it rained. Heavy, thunderous, sorrowful. Margaret sat at the window and watched the drops crawl down the glass like racing tears. Her suitcase sat at the foot of the bed, zipped and quiet, like a silent witness to everything she couldn't say. She had considered mailing him a letter. Just to say goodbye. But even her pain didn't want to guilt him. She wanted him to want her. Not out of shame. Out of love. At a coffee shop downtown, Jeremy met with a potential investor. The man was old, sharp-eyed, and curious. Tell me about your family, he asked out of nowhere. Jeremy blinked. What? Family. Legacy. We don't just invest in ideas, son, we invest in people. Who raised you? Jeremy shifted uncomfortably. Single mom. Adopted. She did her best. The investor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Still in your life? Jeremy forced a laugh. Not really. She's out of the picture now, The old man sipped his espresso, then said coolly, "That's a shame. A man who forgets the people who raised him rarely builds something worth remembering." The meeting ended shortly after, and Jeremy sat alone at the window, the words echoing. Have you ever made a decision in pride, only to realize too late the cost of it? Let us know, what would you do if you were in Jeremy's shoes right now? It was a cold Wednesday morning when fate intervened, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the quiet force of inevitability. Jeremy's car broke down. Of all days. He stood by the side of the road, jacket wrapped tightly around him, muttering into his Bluetooth headset, "Yes, I called the service already. No, I don't need a lift, I'll walk." He ended the call and looked around, irritated. He hadn't walked anywhere in years. Everything about him now was tailored, driven, delivered. He spotted a diner across the street, glowing faintly in the early morning fog. His feet moved before his pride could argue. It was the kind of place his mother used to love. Quiet. Cheap. Honest. A waitress with too much eyeliner and too many heartbreaks poured his coffee without a smile. Jeremy barely noticed her. But he did notice the figure in the corner booth. It was like being punched in the chest. She hadn't seen him yet. She sat with her coat wrapped around her, the same brown suitcase at her side, a bowl of oatmeal untouched in front of her. She looked tired. Smaller. Like grief had folded her in half. Jeremy stood frozen in the doorway. The waitress noticed. "You okay, hon?" He nodded once and walked, no stumbled, toward the booth. Margaret looked up. Their eyes met. The silence between them stretched wide and sharp. He cleared his throat. "Hi." She said nothing. Just looked at him with eyes so gentle, so heartbreakingly tired, it made him feel 10 years old again. "Can I sit?" A beat. Then, a small nod. He slid into the booth across from her, the vinyl squeaking under his weight. "You still like oatmeal," he said. "I still like warm places," she replied quietly, voice steady but hollow. He swallowed. "What are you doing here?" She looked at him for a long time before answering. Eating. Existing. Waiting for something to feel like home again. The weight of her words landed hard. Jeremy looked down at the table. The salt shaker. The cracked napkin holder. Anything but her eyes. "I didn't know you'd be here," he mumbled. "I didn't think you'd want to be." That stung more than it should have. Then her eyes dropped to the suitcase beside her, and for a split second, her hand moved protectively over it. He noticed. "What's in the bag?" She didn't flinch. "Nothing you ever wanted." His eyes narrowed. "Is that supposed to mean something?" She stared at him. "Not yet. Maybe someday." The waitress came by and poured coffee for Jeremy, the clink of ceramic loud between them. "You'll need anything else?" Margaret shook her head. Jeremy started to say no, then paused. "Actually, 2 blueberry pancakes. Extra syrup." He looked at Margaret. She blinked, surprised. "You remembered." "Yeah." They sat in silence for a while, steam rising between them. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft and rhythmic. A strange, quiet peace settled. He wasn't ready to apologize. She wasn't ready to forgive. But neither of them was walking away. Not yet. Have you ever been in a room with someone you hurt, or someone who hurt you, and the silence said everything? Tell us in the comments. Those moments change us. Jeremy returned to the diner the next morning. He hadn't planned to. He told himself it was a coincidence. That he just liked the pancakes. That it had nothing to do with the woman who'd raised him, who now sat alone in the corner booth, her brown suitcase always at her side like a loyal dog. But he came back anyway. Margaret didn't comment. She merely nodded at the chair across from her as if to say, "Suit yourself." And so the routine began. 2 days. 3. Then 5. He brought work some mornings, spread papers across the table, pretended not to notice the way she always set out 2 sugars for his coffee before he even asked. On the 6th day, she spoke without looking up. "You remember when you broke your wrist in 8th grade? Jeremy glanced up from his laptop. "Yeah. Football scrimmage. You cried the whole night. But not from the pain." He paused. Margaret stirred her tea slowly, gently. You cried because I had to miss my shift at the cafeteria. You thought we'd get evicted. You kept apologizing between sobs. Like it was your fault. He looked away. You remember what I told you that night? She asked. Jeremy shook his head. I said, you are never a burden. You're my miracle. His throat tightened. I meant that. Silence fell again, but it was heavier now, pregnant with memory. Then Jeremy asked, why didn't you ever tell me about the money? Margaret looked up. Her eyes didn't flinch. Because I didn't want money to raise you. I wanted me to. I wanted you to grow up knowing the value of people, not price tags. Of hard work. Of kindness. I wanted you to choose who you became, not buy it. Jeremy's face hardened slightly. And what about now? When I kicked you out, you had millions. You could have walked away. Got revenge. Why didn't you? Her gaze softened, not out of weakness, but strength. Because I wasn't angry you threw me out. I was heartbroken that you never saw me to begin with. The words sank like stones. Jeremy leaned back, suddenly exhausted. You think I'm selfish, he muttered. I think you're scared, she replied gently. They both sat with that. Then he looked at the suitcase again. Is it really? She nodded once. It's all there. Still untouched. I didn't carry it for me, Jeremy. He blinked, stunned. I carried it, she whispered, in case you ever needed saving. If someone carried a secret this powerful for you, how would you feel learning the truth? Let's talk about it in the comments, because sometimes love hides in silence. The seventh morning, Jeremy brought her flowers. Nothing grand. Just a small bouquet of daffodils from a street vendor. Margaret stared at them for a moment, then gave a soft, almost imperceptible smile as she reached out. Yellow was your favorite, he said, awkwardly. You remembered. I forget a lot of things, he admitted, but not the important ones. They sat down together, and for the first time in weeks, there was no tension. No waiting for an apology. No defensiveness. Just quiet. Comfortable. The pancakes came. 2 plates, as always. The waitress gave them a curious look, then smiled faintly, like she'd been waiting for this. Margaret stirred her tea. Jeremy didn't have his laptop today. She looked at him across the booth, tilting her head. What are you afraid of, Jeremy? He hesitated. Then, without sarcasm or bravado, said, failing. Again. A pause. In the company? No, he said. In life. In relationships. In being a decent human being. Sometimes it feels like I'm just pretending to be someone who deserves what I have. Margaret nodded gently. You're not the only one who's ever felt that way. He swallowed. And you? You always seemed so steady. So sure. I was terrified, she said, setting down her spoon. All the time. I used to cry into the dishwasher after putting you to bed. But I will never let you see it. Why not? Because I needed you to believe the world was safe. Even when mine wasn't. He looked away quickly, blinking. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I've been carrying this too. Jeremy unfolded it. A list. Written in his 8-year-old handwriting. Things I want to do with Mom. Go to the zoo. Eat ice cream for breakfast. Watch movies all day. Hug her forever. He laughed under his breath, eyes stinging. I remember this, he whispered. I made it for your birthday. You taped it to the fridge, she said. I kept it ever since. He looked up at her. I miss you, he said, voice quiet and raw. I didn't know how much until I saw you here. Margaret reached out slowly, rested her hand over his. I never left, Jeremy. You just stopped looking. For the first time, he didn't pull away. They sat like that, hand in hand, 2 people rediscovering something lost, not in a dramatic rush, but like a warmth returning to frostbitten skin. Is there someone you need to sit across from, not to fight, but to remember who you were together? Drop a line in the comments. Sometimes the first step back is just sitting down. The warmth between them didn't last forever. It never does. A week after their quiet reunion at the diner, Jeremy offered to drive Margaret to the bank. She hesitated at first. Her old station wagon was still working barely, but something in his voice told her he wanted to feel useful again. Maybe even like a son. She agreed. The drive was calm at first. Margaret hummed a tune softly, fingers tapping her worn leather bag in her lap. Jeremy glanced at her with a smile that surprised even him. "I don't remember you humming." "You never noticed," she said. "I always did. It helped me stay calm when I was scared." He paused. "What were you scared of?" "Losing you," she said, as casually as if she were talking about groceries. He didn't know how to respond. But the silence didn't last long. In the bank parking lot, as Margaret reached for the door handle, her bag slipped. The zipper snapped open. Stacks of bound bills, crisp, clean, unmistakable, spilled into the footwell. Jeremy froze. "What the hell?" he whispered. Margaret reached down, panic flashing in her eyes. Don't. "Is this real?" he said, voice rising. She hesitated. "Yes." Jeremy's hands gripped the wheel tighter, jaw locked. "You mean to tell me," he said, his tone sharpening, "that I threw you out, and you were sitting on $19 million? I never planned to use it." "That's not the point," he snapped. "You let me believe we were poor. You let me struggle. You God this whole time." He got out of the car and slammed the door. Margaret followed slowly, standing in the shadow of her son's fury. "You think I wouldn't have made something better of myself if I knew we had that kind of safety net?" he shouted. "You think I wouldn't have been better off?" She looked at him, eyes glassy but calm. "I didn't want you to rely on money. I wanted you to build your own name. Your own integrity." He scoffed. "Instead, I built a company on fumes and fake charm. I pushed away everyone I loved. And you let me. You pushed me away before the money ever mattered." Jeremy stepped back, like her words hit too close. "And now you think showing up at a diner makes it all okay," he said bitterly. "You think pancakes and daffodils fix abandonment?" "I was abandoned long before you kicked me out," she whispered. "You've been gone for years." Her voice cracked then, soft and breaking. But Jeremy didn't hear it. He turned, stormed off down the sidewalk. Margaret stood by the car alone, the bag still open on the passenger seat, cash fluttering slightly in the breeze. She didn't chase him. Not this time. That night, Jeremy didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, Margaret's words ringing like bells in his ears. "You've been gone for years." He remembered Christmas mornings when she'd stay up all night wrapping hand-me-down toys, just so he'd feel seen. He remembered her skipping meals so he could eat more. He remembered her worn-out shoes, her tired eyes, her soft lullabies when he had night terrors. And he remembered, leaving all of it behind the minute he could. He covered his face with both hands and wept, for her, for himself, for everything he had mistaken for weakness when it had been love. But in the quiet, he also wondered, was it too late? The sun rose pale and slowed the next morning. Its light spilled through the blinds of two very different spaces, both quiet, both aching. In a small rented room, Margaret sat alone at the edge of her bed, fingers gently smoothing the edge of her brown suitcase. It was zipped again. Neat. Still full. Her eyes were tired. She didn't go to the diner that morning. Instead, she stayed in the quiet. She had no one else. Nowhere else to go. But that wasn't what stung most. What stung was that for a moment, just a moment, she thought they had found their way back. And then the moment passed, and he was gone again. She whispered into the stillness, "Do I keep waiting? Or do I finally let him go?" She didn't have an answer. Miles away, Jeremy stood at the window of his penthouse. Below him, the city buzzed. Cars, cabs, strangers walking fast to places that mattered. He was dressed in a suit he didn't feel right in. His assistant had rescheduled 3 meetings already. He hadn't moved. On the table beside him sat the list, the one she gave him from his childhood. Hug her forever. His hands shook as he read it again. He didn't go to the office. Instead, he went to her old apartment. Empty. Still smelled faintly like cinnamon and lavender. Her piano was gone. So were her frames. He sat on the bare floor for a long time, head in his hands. He didn't cry this time. He just sat with the weight of it all. Back at the motel, Margaret opened her suitcase, not for the money, but for the small tin box buried at the bottom. Inside were keepsakes. A photo of Jeremy at 3, missing a sock and grinning wide. A dried daffodil from when he picked flowers on her birthday. A keychain he gave her that said "Best Mom Ever," scratched and faded. She held it like it was glass. Then slowly, she began to write. A letter. No bitterness. No guilt. Just the truth. She folded it neatly and placed it on top of the suitcase. Her fingers lingered on it a moment longer, as if she were afraid this was the last thing she would ever say to him. Then, quietly, she stood. That night, Jeremy found the letter on his doorstep. No note. No return address. He opened it slowly, hands trembling. Jeremy, I didn't raise you to be perfect. I raised you to be kind. I failed in places, I know that. But I loved you more than life itself, even when it hurt. The money was never meant to be a secret. It was a shield. You didn't need it to become great, you already were. You just forgot. And maybe I forgot how to show you that too. I forgive you. I hope one day you forgive yourself. If you ever want to come home, the door is still open. But this time, I'm not going to stand in the cold waiting. With all the love I have. Mom. He folded it, pressing it to his chest. And for the first time in his adult life, he chose vulnerability over pride. He reached for his phone. He called the motel. And when the receptionist answered, he asked the one question he should have asked weeks ago. Is Margaret still there? If you were Margaret, would you wait for him to come back? Or walk away and protect your heart once and for all? Let us know below, because forgiveness is a choice, not a guarantee. Jeremy stood in the motel hallway, holding the letter in one hand, a trembling paper bag in the other. Room 217. His breath fogged slightly as he raised his hand to knock. He hesitated, then knocked twice, soft, unsure but real. Inside, Margaret looked up from her chair. She didn't move at first. Then slowly she stood. She opened the door. They stared at each other. No words at first. Just eyes. Wounded. Hopeful. Scared. Jeremy broke the silence. I brought tea. The kind you like. Lemon. With honey. Her eyes softened. You remembered. He nodded, throat tight. I read your letter, he said. Every word felt like grace I don't deserve. Margaret stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him in. He sat in the same chair she'd been sitting in for days, her world, now reduced to 4 walls and quiet resilience. He handed her the tea. She took it gently, fingers brushing his. Why did you come? She asked, her voice low. Jeremy took a breath. Because I finally realized what I lost. And I'd rather spend the rest of my life trying to earn a second chance than living with the regret of never asking for one. He looked down at his hands. I was angry. But not at you. At myself. For being so blind. For needing control so badly, I pushed away the one person who loved me when I had nothing. Margaret's eyes glistened, but she said nothing yet. Jeremy continued. You didn't owe me anything. And still, you carried me. In your arms. In your heart. In a damn suitcase filled with a future you were saving for me. He swallowed hard. I was ungrateful. Cruel. And I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But, if you can find it in your heart to let me try. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A photo. Then when he was a boy. The same one from her keepsake box. Then maybe we can start here. Not going back. Just forward. Margaret stared at the photo. Then at him. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand. And didn't let go. Weeks passed. Margaret moved into a new home, a small cottage just outside the city, with a garden, a warm kitchen, and sunlight that hit the piano in the mornings. Jeremy helped her move in. He came by every Saturday. Sometimes they just drank tea. Sometimes they walked the garden path and said nothing at all. But the silence between them had changed. It was peaceful now. Restful. One afternoon, she asked him to open the suitcase. He blinked. Are you sure? She nodded. They unpacked it together, each stack of bills like a brick of silent, unspoken years. Jeremy picked up one bundle and looked at her. What do you want to do with it? Margaret smiled gently. I want to build something that matters. Together, they founded a scholarship fund, in her name, but in Jeremy's words. To honor the mothers who carry worlds in silence, and the sons who finally learn how to say thank you. The day it launched, Margaret wore a daffodil on her lapel. Jeremy stood beside her, hand on her shoulder, pride in his eyes, not because of the money, but because she was his mother. And he was finally worthy of saying so. Margaret's suitcase, once a secret, is now a seed for something beautiful. The list from Jeremy's childhood? She framed it, placed it above her piano. Hug her forever. He does. Every visit. Every time. Without fail. Do you believe people can truly change after hurting the ones they love? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes redemption is just one honest moment away. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I'm sure you enjoyed it, didn't you? We have plenty more beautiful and interesting stories waiting for you. So go ahead, click the image on your screen and enjoy the next one.